Hello, Cyberwill2 here. This is my list of 5 underrated games that I think you should maybe try. All these games I would consider at least a 6 out of 10, which might sound low, but when you think that a 5 out of 10 is completely average, what I'm saying is basically that all the games on this list are at least above average, which in my opinion is always worth checking out. First game on this list is called Infested Planet. Infested Planet is an indie strategy game where your mission is to use your soldiers and abilities to eradicate all the enemies on the map. This is easier said than done, of course. You do this by going from nest to nest, destroying them, which gives you more points to spend on more soldiers, upgrading your soldiers, or building ability buildings, which give you abilities like being able to call in an airstrike, or giving your buildings turrets, things like that. It's got a campaign that's about 8 to 10 hours long, and it's competently written. I wouldn't say that it stuck with me too much, apart from the hive mind character that speaks like a Shakespearean character. I really thought he was cool. What you're here for will be primarily the gameplay, which I think Infested Planet does really well. As you progress through the campaign, the infestation's abilities grow with your own, so there's a really satisfying difficulty curve throughout the entire campaign, as you use your new upgrades to try and outmaneuver or outplay the enemy's new upgrades. Overall, Infested Planet is a really solid game for any strategy fan, and I would even say it could be a good game for anyone who's new to the strategy genre, since you don't usually control more than about 8 soldiers, so it should stop you from feeling overwhelmed, which is something I used to struggle with when I first started playing strategy games like Dawn of War. And I mean the original Dawn of War, of course, not the crappy third one. The second game I want to recommend is called Red Hot Vengeance, which is an isometric shooter with lots of violence, similar to Hotline Miami. This game is also absolutely free, so you should definitely check it out if you like the look of it. Also, you should check out the soundtrack, because its soundtrack is really good. And on the subject of soundtracks, actually, Infested Planet's soundtrack is also pretty solid as well. Especially its main menu theme, which is really freaking badass. Red Hot Vengeance has a fairly simple story about a hitman that's looking for revenge after his boss betrays him. The story is told in this comic book style. It's more just about contextualizing the levels and the violent gameplay more than anything, but I thought it was pretty entertaining. The gameplay is really fun, it's very fast paced, and every weapon has a really satisfying kick to it. I especially like the dual wield Uzis. I think they're probably the most fun weapon in the game. Just the game story is just really fun in general. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's quite short, which is fine for a free game, and the levels are quite varied. It also has a lot of these challenges to do once you're done with the story, which actually some of them can be quite difficult, which just adds to the fun for me. I like my games to be difficult. The addition of these challenges reminded me of games of old, where they would give you fun things to do after you'd completed the main campaign. A feature that is sorely missed in modern games, designed for dumb twats. One thing to mention is I love the way this game looks as well. The style is just really cool. I just really like the way this game's graphics are.
By the time I got to her, she was on her way out. Her sides rose slowly as she gasped for air, but the lack of skin told me that she wasn't going to make it. She gazed up at me with her last working eye, in too much pain to produce a tear or cry out. I drew my gun, and with hesitation, I broke my rule.
Another game for you to check out is called Heat Signature. Another top-down game, except this one is set in space, and it's a roguelite. You play as a number of characters, each with their own starting weapon and equipment, as well as their own personal mission to achieve. As each randomly generated character, you go into the randomly generated star system and attack randomly generated ships to liberate the galaxy. The story is just bland. I didn't find anything too interesting about it. However, the gameplay I feel has a lot of depth to it. The sheer amount of randomly generated weapons and tools you can get in this game is pretty awesome. I'll give you a few of my favourites. The first one is just the humble wrench that you can use to whack people over the head. It's got this really satisfying thwack sound, and it's good for a stealth player like me. Another tool is the key cloner, which you can use to copy a keycard off a guard, allowing you to sneak past undetected. And then there's also the swapper, which allows you to swap places with any other person, provided you're in range of them. This is of course all for a stealth build, but you could just go all out with guns and hacking tools and try and fight your way through. This would alert the ship probably pretty quickly though, and when a ship goes into alert, it beelines for the nearest space station. And if you're still on the ship when it arrives, your character will unfortunately be captured. But you can actually rescue your character with a subsequent character if you're lucky, which is a pretty cool touch. If you get knocked out during a ship boarding as well, the enemy will throw you out the nearest airlock, at which point you only have a few seconds to catch yourself with your little boarding pod. Overall, whilst I found the story lacking, this game has loads to offer in terms of gameplay. The next game I recommend is called Armies of Exgio. Armies of Exgio is basically StarCraft but fantasy. You think I'm joking? Just look at the Zerg faction of this game. They're called the Fallen in this game, but my point still stands. I'm being a little bit reductive however, because I honestly think this game does have a really cool story for the most part, especially during the Fallen campaign, which is a really fun campaign, really interesting story, which I won't spoil too much here. Well, I won't spoil it at all actually, because it's just cool, and you should experience it for yourself. Also, how can you not love the design of this guy? It's something I've never really seen in fantasy before. This is a sort of game that will probably be covered by Mandalore Gaming at some point. This is an unfairly obscure RTS game from the early 2000s. Sure, it plays like a generic RTS game with base building, resource gathering and army control, but it does all these things very competently, all wrapped up with really tight controls and a really fun story about 3 factions vying for power over a fantasy world. This game is not sold anymore on Steam or Origin, Epic Game Store or GOG, so you definitely cannot download it from anywhere. Do not download this game, ever. Don't download the game. If you see it online, just don't do it. Just don't do it, that would be bad. Okay, my final game is called Intravenous, a top-down stealth game with very in-depth stealth gameplay. You of course have to stay out of the light and move slowly so as to not make too much noise. These are all fairly standard, but there's so many little details, like if you turn off a light or leave a door open, an enemy might come in to investigate. Also, if you kill an enemy and then drag their body away, blood will drip from the body and leave a trail behind, which I don't think I've ever seen any other game do. So if you do know another game that does this, please let me know, because I'd love to see that. Also, the gunplay is really well done as well. The enemies react quite intelligently and won't just all rush into the room just for you to shoot them all. The enemies will kind of lay siege to the room and maybe try and outflank you. And it just makes the combat really tense and makes the AI also feel quite alive as well. Intravenous also has a pretty great story about a man who wants to eradicate the drug dealers in the city he lives in after his family member was killed in a mugging involving drug dealers. I found the story to be really solid and the characters were well written. Not to get too personal here, but I'm British, and here in Britain right now there's a pretty huge crime problem. So I found the story to be quite prudent, especially. Not that I'm going to replicate the main character's actions or anything, but I'm just saying, I felt cool, this story, it felt good. Well, there you go, 5 underrated games you should check out if you're cool. I'll definitely make another video on more underrated games, because I enjoy showing people underrated games. It's just something I enjoy doing, so I'll definitely make another list at some point.